Hey friends, welcome to session 6 as we talk about the role of the mentor. And so the very first thing we want to make sure that you jump into is not going in, head first into this mentoring relationship and how you're going to serve this individual. It really is modeling a Christ-centered life on your own. And so you need to make sure that your community group knows what you're doing, that people who know and love you know what you're doing, that this is not a journey or a path to walk in isolation, but it's one that you start to assess maybe some of your own woundedness. Something that we see a lot in people that want to help others is maybe a wound that they have not been able to heal themselves. And so they're hoping that by fixing and helping somebody else who is in need, that they're going to be able to kind of fill that void. And that's not how this works. So you've got to be healthy yourself. You've got to be walking with Christ, devoting daily in God's Word, and truly just submitting yourself to the Holy Spirit as you model this Christ-centered life. And it becomes something that is winsome and something that is healthy and something that your mentee can see in you as you are vibrant, even if you're working through some difficult times in marriage or in parenting or in work or whatever is going on in your life. That doesn't mean that you're not modeling Christ-centered life just because you might be struggling in certain aspects. But model Christ-centered life means that you are surrendered and that you are confidently stewarding your time and your resources well as you begin to pray with and for your mentee. And so establishing that relationship is the next step, is you kind of make first contact and reach out.
I just want to say something real quick. When it says, you're modeling a Christ-centered life, whenever we are processing, whether you're a good fit at this time to be a mentor in our program, we're going to be asking, hey, have you processed this well with your community group? If you're married, have you processed this with your spouse, with your family? Do they think this is a good fit for you at this time? Do they think that this is something that would be good for the bandwidth that you have at this season of life? We also are going to ask, if there are some past hurts, habits, maybe abortion's part of your story or something that you aren't trying to do this to pay a debt or right or wrong. So we're going to process some of that with you. And then one of the things that Bruce said was praying with and for your mentee, that is so important. And I have found some of the more powerful times when I have been talking with a potential mentee and she's just sharing her story. And it might be the first time that we've made connection with her and we're doing an intake. And I just, if I feel like it's appropriate, I say, hey, are you okay if I pray for you? And I almost always say yes. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, hey, you've shared some big things with me. I'm going to pray for this, this, and this. Is there anything else that you'd like for me to pray for? And it's always powerful, and it cements us in Christ. And so that is a very important part of just being a mentor, is praying with and for your mentee.
Yeah. So keep in mind, as you're establishing this relationship, your mentee is in a very similar position to you, where it's like, what is this going to be like? There's some of that nervousness that just comes from meeting new people and going, hey, I'm kind of raising my hand and saying, I want to have a friendship with somebody that's going to walk with me through this thing. We're helping them set reasonable expectations in the same way we're helping you set reasonable expectations for this relationship. But as you jump in, there is some of that where it's just like, okay, I'm committing myself to reaching out to this person, even if they don't respond, even if they don't reciprocate in the way that I expect them to. And so be faithful in that and take that step. Obviously, love with truth and grace. There are going to be some things that get said, maybe even early on, where you're trying to kind of navigate like, gosh, I'm not sure that I understand what she meant, but it sounded like she or he meant this. And I need to correct that and help them think rightly about how they're created, about their child, about maybe some other aspect of their life. Mm-hmm. And that's where you start to kind of, conflict is a great opportunity to build the relationship.
Absolutely. And, when you're establishing this relationship, I want to acknowledge that you're probably going to be nervous. Every single mentor we talk to, every single one I talk to, she says, hey, I'm really scared and I'm really nervous. And I said, great. You should be, and that is totally normal, and it is totally okay. And I'm always scared and nervous too. Sometimes whenever we get a call, I'm like, oh my gosh, and I just have to say, Lord, you are in this, you are for me, you are for her, be in this with me. But if you're walking in going, I'm nervous and I'm scared, welcome. Welcome. Don't let that put you off. We're glad you're here.
Yeah. Have you noticed that women who don't have this as part of their story are more nervous?
Yes. They 100% are more nervous. And so just be welcome here. Don't feel like, hey, I don't have this crazy story. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Neither one of those things makes you right or wrong to be a mentor.
Yeah.
It is a willingness to be faithful and letting God do the work.
That's good. Yeah. So we don't want to belabor the point, but I do just want to say that we recognize it can be scary. And yet at the same time, we're going, hey, come on, you're God's people. And he is abiding with you and calling you into this as just a faithful response to who we are. And so as you begin to engage with your mentee, just know that they are in crisis. We talked about in session 4 about kind of that tornado experience that every woman and man is a part of and is just going, man, it feels like my world is spinning. And so we realize that there is some acceptance that has to be admitted there, and some affirmation and lots of respect and just sympathizing and empathizing with the position that they're in. As you start to process maybe some of your own experiences, if you're a parent already, you might think of like the first time you had to bring your newborn home and are just like, man, that was, I didn't even know how to buckle the car seat into the car, and much less like now I'm responsible for this human being. So lots of hope, lots of opportunity to provide just patience and consistency and build trust with your mentee, but engage in very realistic, like see needs, be a little bit of a detective. I think there's an opportunity there to go, hey, like I heard you say this, is this a need? And ask good questions. We'll talk about some more of that in the following sessions as we kind of wrap up our training, but engage with your mentee through crisis as you recognize like, hey, it's time to jump into the trenches and be about it with this mom or with this dad that's struggling. So while this isn't the first place to start, initially it's how can we get to know each other? How can we connect? How can we set some kind of rhythm for communication? That's super important. Eventually you want to get into some goal setting as you're developing this relationship and you're going, hey, where is this headed? And so we use the SMART goals, which is just an acronym that I'll unpack here in just a second. When you're developing these goals and helping them think through like, hey, what do you want to accomplish or what do you need to accomplish? I think one of the things that I see most frequently in people in crisis is just a lack of decision making where they are frozen. And instead of making wise decisions, they choose to not make decisions at all. We even have times where we engage with a mom and she's 7 months pregnant and you're going, how have you not made any decisions yet? And it's because she is frozen in this moment where she's just like paralyzed by what's going on and doesn't know how to oftentimes get out of their own way. And so you are just helping them unfreeze and go, great, let's take the next faithful, next wise step, next discerning step together. And so SMART, again, is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And as you are walking through some of these things, you don't want to start with, hey, let's list 20 goals that you have for the next week. You want to think about maybe the major areas of your mentee's life. So it could be just personal healthcare and self-care. It could be relationships with parents or boyfriend or father of the child, whoever he is in her life or she is in his life. As you begin to think through some of those things, it could be things like education or work. But there are some major buckets that are common to all of us in our lives that we want you to kind of work through in these SMART goals and go, great, what is one goal that you have for yourself just in caring for your own health? Or what is one goal that you have for work that we can begin moving towards some kind of successful win in their life? And once they have that win under the belt, they start to gain momentum and go, gosh, I'm capable. I'm able to do these things. But you've got to make sure that they're not just vague ideas that are out there, that they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound. So I don't want to belabor this idea, but I do want to make sure that you have some handholds that you can go, okay, like, am I just texting this person back and forth, or are we doing something together? So mentoring usually does not involve like a real structured curriculum. It's why we don't have a class. It is why we talk about it being a relationship. It's because we don't want to say like, hey, once you go through class 1 through 12, then you're all of a sudden check, accomplished, and you're a parent. That's not how life works oftentimes. It is done in community. It is done in relationships, and you're the start of that for this individual. And so giving them some handholds with these SMART goals is really going to be an asset that you bring as you help them think through things in a very logical sense, in a very measured sense. And again, it's got to be attainable. It can't just be this kind of vague idea, but help them set some goals. Maybe it's a few weeks into getting to know them. Maybe you've gone to coffee. Maybe you've just kind of heard some of their story. You've gotten to share your story, and now you're moving forward. But let's talk about some of the negative outcomes that come from a mentoring relationship and how you can just prepare your heart knowing that these are some very real possibilities.
So next we want to talk about what are some positive, negative outcomes when it comes to mentoring. And these aren't really fun to talk about, but we would be remiss if we weren't very honest with you that this is hard. And we're dealing with some people with some really hard circumstances, and we want you to be prepared. We don't want you to say, hey, I didn't know this could be a possibility. I didn't know this could possibly happen with her. So I want to start by saying with the mentoring program, we have what I call a lot of false starts. So the first thing you see is abandoning the mentoring relationship. And that just means we have a lot of people that are referred to our program through various avenues and act really excited and say, hey, this is what we want. And it ends up that they just don't continue. And sometimes we don't even get very far with them, but a couple of phone calls, maybe a meeting, and then they're just like, hey, this is not what I thought it was going to be. I thought maybe it's going to be more about goods or services, or I thought it was going to be more about you just kind of affirming my decisions and what I'm wanting to do. Maybe this has more of a spiritual component than I thought it was going to be. And so I don't want people on our team to be discouraged if the mentoring relationship is abandoned, especially if it's abandoned early on. It is just part of the ministry, and so be prepared for that. Another possible negative outcome is that she makes a choice for abortion. I'm happy to say that so far that's not happened, but it is a very real reality that she may choose to have an abortion. And of course, it is not going to change that we're still going to love her and want to engage with her. We cannot affirm that decision. We can't go there with her. And we can give her all the reasons, like, hey, this is a life created by God. Go through all the things that we talked about in Abortion 101. This is what it could do to your body. This is what it could do to you emotionally. And you could have shared all that with her, and she's going to make possibly the decision to end her baby's life. And that it's a possibility. It's not a breakdown of something that you did as a mentor. It is just something that can happen because we live in a sinful, broken, fallen world. And so we're still going to be there. We're still going to love her. We're still going to encourage her, even if she ghosts us. And we can process that with you and encourage you with how's the best way you're going to handle that. And I'm sure that will already have been brought to leadership, and we'll be walking with you through that faithfully. Another possible negative outcome is they're struggling through parenting. This parenting's hard, and we've already said that over and over again. It is hard, even in the best of circumstances. So just go ahead and know she's going to struggle through parenting. Raising a baby,
I think we all struggle through parenting a bit.
Raising a newborn, all of that, she's going to struggle. And it does not mean that the relationship is over. It is a great opportunity for you to step in even further and try to love her well. But we just want to be prepared. And we're going to talk about, in even the next session, some other possible hard things that are going to come up and go into that a little deeper.
Yeah, I think the thing I want to encourage you away from is having kind of a rescue mentality. I know that there are some great positive outcomes that can come from this as we think about being faithful, and as we think about just displaying the gospel to those that we're caring for. And yet, obviously, a woman choosing abortion may feel like, oh, I just completely failed. And yet, I don't think we can overstate how tragic abortion is. And at the same time, if God is patient and kind to us, to the world, as this tragedy really has continued. I don't know that there's a word substantial enough for what abortion is in our world, but knowing that it's still happening and God has patiently not intervened, right, and just wiped us all out, he's still been patient and kind. And so I know that we can be patient and kind in following that example as we walk alongside these women and men. So just keep that in mind. I know that there's that sense of like, I really want to help somebody, and yet there is still an opportunity to help someone. Our Worth More ministry for women and men is an after-abortion care ministry. There are other after-abortion care ministries all over the country that we still want to hold out and go, hey, we know you made this choice. This is available to you. Hope and healing is available to you. Christ is still available to you. Abortion is not the unforgivable sin. And we want to communicate that really strongly. And yet at the same time, that's not what we lead with. Certainly, we want to go, hey, life is what God has chosen for you, even if struggling through parenting is going to be really hard and it's not maybe what you had set out or what you had in mind initially. So we want to jump into some of the details of what we expect from you and some guidelines to give you some really some lanes to run in so that this isn't just nebulous and you're all over the place, not knowing kind of, hey, what's okay, what's not okay, what's too much, what's not enough, what am I actually committing to? You know, we made the statement at the very beginning that this is a 2-year commitment, at least a year after birth of the child. And so we get that that's heavy. It's why this training is extensive, and it's not just, hey, come sit down for 30 minutes and maybe read this and let's talk. But we really wanted to give you a lot of good information so that you felt equipped and prepared to lead. But we want to jump into how you connect and confidentiality issues and boundaries and even social media and money and gifts and all those things that come up that you may have to navigate so we can move forward together.
One of the first things we want to talk about is how often should you connect with your mentee. And we say that we would love for initially you to connect with her 2-3 times a week initially. Now that is pretty, that's a big ask, and I realize that. And you may not be able to connect with her 2 to 3 times a week. She may not be available. You may not be available to do that either. But we're just saying that would be ideal. Do you have to connect with her in person 2 to 3 times a week? No. I would love for at least a once a week in-person connection with her as you're getting started. And as I say that, I realize that may not be possible either. It does not mean that you're a failure as a mentor or that your relationship's not working. It's just that is ideal. She may not be able to, you may not be able to nail her down. We have gals that have been mentoring women, and they don't get to see each other very often. In the land of COVID, that has changed a lot of in-person meetings, but we still have remained faithful, and we just do the best that we can. But as you're trying to establish that relationship, try to meet with her more often than not. Connecting with her through text is also great. A lot of people love to connect through text. We don't want you to do that all the time. We don't want you to just text her and that's the only way you communicate. But touching base with her throughout the day, or once or twice a week, saying, "Hey, I was thinking about you. How'd it go when you met with your brother last week?" Or, "Hey, I was thinking about you today and I prayed this for you." Those are powerful ways just to connect and check and just see how she's doing and help to build that relationship.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of these SMART goals and your connection kind of playing into one another as you're in some ways checking on progress, and in other ways it's like, hey, I don't have an agenda to check on progress on you all the time. Because one of the things that we've noticed in some of the adults that we've cared for through mentoring and through other relationships and ministries is they've never had this many people interested in their life before. And so they're just not used to that much communication or that much actual interest or accountability. And so in some ways it can feel like overwhelming. And so you want to make sure that you just navigate some of that really carefully, again, as you're setting expectations on the front end and just connecting 2-3 times a week. So the second thing that we want to talk about is confidentiality, because there may be some things that they share, especially if it's related to their own personal health or drugs or relationships where somebody might be abusive or using drugs, especially as that's a common thing in the foster care world, which is really more of some like downstream things from this particular ministry. But you've got to promise not to keep secrets. So when somebody maybe shares something with you and just says, "Oh, like don't tell anybody that," you want to make sure you use maybe a phrase like, "Hey, you can trust me with the information that you give me, but if I need to widen the circle to make sure that you're cared for well, if we need to bring other people in, we would certainly do that." Like if your health was declining, we would want to make sure that we talk to the right person to get you the right kind of help that you need. And so you can trust me with what you share. We're going to encourage each other in sort of a biblical community, and we may have to manufacture some of that for them for a time. We're certainly going to encourage them to address conflict in healthy ways and maybe avoid conflict with people who aren't healthy. But just saying, hey, I'll keep whatever secrets you share with me is actually not going to serve them. And you certainly don't want to get to a point where you're breaking a promise that you gave them because you said you'd keep a secret and you realize you can't.
I want to say something about that. We had something come up within our team. We actually had a gal that was serving with us, and having an unexpected pregnancy was part of her story. And she brought such a great perspective of, hey, especially even when we would get together for our monthly meetings and we would talk about what's going on with our mentees, we decided that we were going to couch that in a very respectful way and language. Not that we weren't doing that already, but like we realized that it was better if we were going to be sharing something about her and her story, even if we wanted to ask for prayer. We found it very powerful to go to the mentee and say, hey, can I share this with the group? Do I have your permission to share this with the group?
That's good.
And ask them for some wisdom and insight, or ask them to pray over this with me. And it just helped create trust. And so I kind of love that is, on our group meet, someone will say, hey, I got permission to share this, and then they'll share it. Or they'll share it during the, hey, I got permission to share this. And I think because they asked permission first, it just helped create that level of trust and intimacy in the relationship.
Yeah. So when we talk about setting boundaries, kind of the rest of the expectations and guidelines we're going to discuss is going to be around boundaries, but in various different issues. So things like the mentee's home, your own home, money and gifts, transportation, some of those things. But you want to make sure that you talk about these things in the beginning and just kind of introduce it as you begin to connect. Probably this is a conversation you want to have when you're talking in person, as opposed to through a text message or something of just like, hey, could we establish some boundaries for our relationship, just so that we don't end up kind of crossways or out of sync in regards to what I'm hoping to be open with and care for you with, and yet at the same time, like, I don't want to be asking you questions that you just don't want to talk about. There may be some times I have to push because we're talking about something that's really meaningful, but there may be some other times that you just go, hey, I'm just not sure I'm ready to talk about that yet. And that's okay. We want to, again, set some expectations, some boundaries in the beginning.
So as we're walking through some of these, the next things we're talking about are boundaries. So social media, one of the things that we say is, hey, in the beginning, just say no. I think it's wise that you just have that boundary in place for a little while, that you're not going to connect with them on social media. That doesn't mean that down the road you won't, but as you're getting to know them and getting to build trust with them, especially, we don't know if they're going to be engaged for the long haul. As leadership, we say, wait on that until you feel that there's been some more time. And then if you're like, hey, I'd like to be friends with her on Instagram now, is that okay? Just bring it to leadership and we'll say, yeah. Or maybe we'll know a little bit more about her story or what's going on or kind of how y'all's relationship has been. We might say, hey, just wait on that.
So the only other thing that I'd add on social media is this. Social media can be really superficial in the way that you connect. And then it can also be like, wow, you share a lot. People use social media in different ways. And so certainly there are things there that we want to be considerate of. It's not just, hey, we want to keep people at arm's length, but we do want to get to know them a little bit more. There may even be people that just go, hey, I post a lot of things on social media that I don't want you to know about. And I've come across times where I've had a pastoral care situation where I'm like, gosh, you post a lot of things that are really inappropriate, and that's an aspect of your life that we're going to have to work on a little bit, because if you're going to mature in your walk with Christ and your love for Him, this feels like it's a stumbling block to you, and yet I'm not going to start there. So that's what we mean when we say, hey, put that off for just a minute and get to know each other better, especially because we want to make sure that you're really investing in that relationship and it doesn't become a superficial way to connect online.
The next thing is communication. You may be the type of person where, hey, I don't like to take calls after 9:30 or 10 o'clock. Go ahead and communicate that up front with your mentee. Say, hey, you might need me and it might be an emergency, but they may love to talk at 2 a.m. and think that's perfectly fine, and that's not fine for you and your family. And I love this because you're modeling healthy, appropriate boundaries for her and she or for him, and they may have never had that. Yeah. So feel free just to be upfront and communicate that, and it's better to overly communicate up front than to have to back away later.
Or you might help them establish that boundary for themselves of just like, hey, I'm not entirely sure what you're doing at 2 a.m., right, but I'm asleep getting ready for the next day. And so when you're thinking about SMART goals and you're looking back at, hey, you want to be employed, you want a job where you can provide for yourself or your child or your family, be thoughtful about what time you need to go to bed. And they may just not have had anybody manage that for them and set a good model that they could follow. So being around their home and connecting to their home is another thing that may come up where they may go, hey, I need a ride, or could you come over? I'm having such and such an issue. And if that need arises, one of the reasons why we ended up doing our own mentoring ministry is because we wanted to be able to be discerning. We didn't necessarily want a policy from a nonprofit organization dictating what we could or could not do as needs arise. And so as God's people, with the Holy Spirit in us, we feel like it is best looking at Scripture, and the example that even Christ gave to his disciples is, hey, don't go alone. Yeah. Take somebody with you and be thoughtful about that. Even when it seems like it's this absolute emergency, reach out to your community group or your spouse or whoever it may be. Just go, hey, I just need somebody to go along with me.
Call the team, get someone to go. So yeah, we just say don't go for a while until a relationship has been established, trust has been established, and then once you feel that that is safe and it's okay. We had something like this happen where there was a brand new mentor. She just met her mentee. She was gung-ho and excited. This gal didn't have a car, needed a ride home. She goes, hey, I'll take you home. Just didn't even really think about it. And so she took her home. She got invited up to the apartment. She went up to the apartment and then realized, she did not feel safe there. There was a boyfriend situation. There was some other stuff going on. And she just, had a pure heart and was excited, but kind of ran ahead and then later had to backtrack that. And it kind of was awkward. And it's like, hey, well, you've been to my apartment. You've already come. Why aren't you coming now? So we just say as leadership, don't do it until you feel that relationship has been established. And then, then you can start to do that. Yeah. Same thing for the mentor's home. We ask that you don't do that right away either until wisdom would show that, hey, that is safe. She's safe to have him or her around your family. And then we say, go for it. Do it. Do it all.
Yeah, it's not no forever.
Have them come. Have them have a meal. Have them be a part of a healthy family, of healthy parenting. Not that your parenting's perfect, because nobody's is, but let them even see that. So we say, yes, we're all for it, but not right away. Just wait on it.
Yeah. And so transportation's kind of a similar thing. You might, if you're available, you might help with transportation a little bit here and there, but we certainly don't want you to become is it a dependent relationship where they're like depending on you, like, hey, can you take me to work? Hey, can you do this or that? Is that the kind of...
Absolutely. And what I want to say is the reality is probably about 70%, give or take, of our mentees do not have transportation. And so that might be awkward for you, but that's not awkward for them.
Yeah,
they are used to using the bus. They are used to using other forms of transportation. And as we've been working through that, it's not really awkward at all to say, hey, I'm going to meet you at this location, at this Starbucks, or at this other meeting place, and they're going to get there, and you're going to meet her there, and that is fine. So you also don't want to, you want to be empowering them to be able to make their decisions. You're not wanting to do all this stuff for them so you won't feel as awkward, right? And so if you are mentoring someone, however, that is a minor under the age of 17, we might need to get a waiver signed by their parents. So that's just another layer. If they're a minor, process that with leadership, and we'll go from there. We want to keep you safe, too, if you were to have someone that is underage with you in your car.
Yeah. So next thing is money and gifts. We realize that sometimes there is a practical, realistic financial need that this mom... I remember the time you called me that you were like, hey, it's $80 to fix this flat tire,
Yeah.
and that's going to prevent all these other things. And we had already decided that we weren't going to spend more than $20 a month on a mentee. That was just going to be kind of a standard policy. And yet we went, hey, that seems like a reasonable deal. And so let's be wise and discerning as we think about those opportunities, knowing that we can't do that for everybody. But
I processed that with leadership, and it was kind of a one-off deal. It was a long story, but she had no transportation, and her one asset was broken down, and she needed a tire. And so we don't want to be what's the word?
Enabling,
but we also just don't want to say, hey, this is a hard and fast rule.
No and always no.
This is not the way Jesus operated. And so, there was some times where we've had some gals that had some really hard, big needs where she had to go to the hospital, and she had 5 kids at home, and nobody else looking after them. So did we say, well, we've got $20? No, we bought groceries, and we took groceries over, and we made sure the kids were fed, and then we kept going over and making sure. So. And again, another thing about that is if there's a big need, if she has, she can't get groceries or she can't pay her rent, there are lots of other avenues that we can go down to get food without us having to open up our wallets and do that. And that is a lot more helpful for her to say, hey, here's this resource, here's this phone number, call, give them your information, and they're going to be able to set you up with food. And then they've learned how to do that for themselves. They've been empowered to do that for themselves rather than us just saying, we're going to do that for you.
Yeah. So last piece is just communicating with leadership. So where you find yourself just kind of back against the wall, it's always okay to tell your mentee, hey, can I get back to you on that?
Absolutely.
Like, I really appreciate that you are an emergency right now. I'm not trying to drag my feet. I'm going to pick up the phone and call our leadership team right now and help get clarity on what we can do and what we can help you. But what I don't want to do is promise you that we can do something that I can't actually follow through on. And so let me pray with you real quick. Let me call them. Let me send an email. Do whatever it is that you need to do in order to make sure that they get the help that they need. And then follow up, right? So communicate with leadership real well, especially when you feel like, gosh, I don't know what the right words are to say. And just be discerning in that moment as opposed to letting the crisis kind of catch you to where you feel like now you're on this train that has run away and you don't know how to get off. That's what we want to make sure that we protect you from and protect your mentee from as well, because they may feel like, gosh, I don't know how to get them out of my life now either, because they're fixing all my problems for me. And that's not necessarily the relationship that we're talking about when we talk about mentoring.